What's up guys, it's Johnny Candido of Candido Training HQ. Today I'm doing a Q&A from Instagram. So for future reference, I'll be posting that on there for questions to be asked for these videos. And if you don't follow me, a link will be in the description. It's got 300 plus comments, so bear with me. I'm gonna sort through this and I'm gonna make an edit between each question just because I'm trying to find my place here. So without further ado, let's get into it. Okay, tips on transitioning into a heels on floor bench press setup. So for those who don't know, the USAPL and the IPF require that you have your heels on the floor, whereas other federations do not. So you can just have your forefoot on the floor and your heels up, which allows you to typically arch a little bit more. And that's kind of a tough transition for some people. But the biggest thing is you want to focus on contracting your glutes. That will help you push through your heels and to keep your heels planted. Whereas when your forefoot's up, typically the tension is a little bit more in your quads and maybe you just feel a little bit of a hip flexor stretch as you arch. So that's the main difference. And then from there, what will help a lot will just be having an Olympic lifting shoe, because that will of course just add a certain degree of inches, for usually 0.75 of an inch to an inch and a quarter. And that's just added, basically you can get in the most similar positions possible because you're just adding an inch and a quarter onto your regular setup and your heels might already be on the floor just by doing that. So the last, a little bit of a nuance, those were the two main points, but a little bit of nuance, maybe you want to mess with the foot angle. For some people, actually rotating their feet out a little bit both helps with that glute tension because then you can flex your abductors a little bit more. And by flaring your feet out, for some people, if the outside of your heel's coming off, then that can bias it more towards the inside of your heels. So that's just another tip, and that's something you really have to find out for yourself. Johnny, I've done my own programming, and it's basically upper lower with an arm day thrown in on Sunday for fun. Is this okay? I'm slowly transitioning from powerlifting to bodybuilding style. So for any question like this, yes, it's absolutely okay. As long as you're adding a variable that's not taking away from your recovery in everything else that you're managing. So you have the time, and by arm day you mean biceps, then that's no issue. What do you prefer and why? Pushing hard for a limited period and deloading, or finding a more sustainable way of training without planned deloads, especially considering your injury history? Okay, this one's gonna take a little while to unpack. So when you say deload, it's important to understand that as a concept, you can deload without pushing things too hard. So for example, I would say deloading is really any type of fluctuation of variables. You're going to have a deload in some sense. So if you're preparing for a meet, a taper is by all means a deload in terms of volume. And it's usually a deload in terms of intensity too, but not quite to the same extent. So you might still be handling 80% or even 85%. But it's still, the volume alone is such a big factor that is a deload. And if you're trying to go a full year of training, let's say on the deadlift, let's say you're trying to do 10 to 15 reps per week throughout the entire year, then you don't want any deload, so you're just going with a lower number and trying to sustain that. And then at the day, what you're just doing is like a pseudo-linear progression that's actually going to get you in more trouble. You're basically using a novice-style progression throughout the entire year and kind of forcing progress. You're going to have to kind of guess when you're going to be able to bump up in weight because you haven't given yourself a stimulus that kind of helps you predict when you actually should be able to add weight. So I don't think that that's the smartest way to do it. Now, that's a more literal approach to your question. So I think planned deloads are always good in some capacity. It just depends on how you actually deload. You don't have to go 50% intensity, super low volume. It doesn't have to be this generic type of deload. But when it comes to the spirit of your question, I think you're probably getting more at the idea of accumulating so much fatigue that you're clearly overtrained to the point where it's significantly detracting from performance, and then you feel beat up, then you're deloading. So that's definitely something that I was flirting with a little bit that caused issues, and then I've definitely backed off of that strategy. And I think that's what you're seeing, a lot of people who've kind of pushed that volume. Now they're kind of creeping away from it because in the long term, you definitely don't want to overreach too far. So for example, what I've done for myself is I've set a limit of 5 sets on a competition style deadlift. No matter what, I will never do a workout with over 5 sets. So that includes singles, that includes everything. I'll never do that. Now it doesn't include variations, but the point is I don't want to do 6 sets, 7 sets, or 8 sets. No matter what, I'll just never let myself get to that point. Also on the deadlift, what I've restricted myself is never going more frequently than once every 3 days if doing my old setup. So if I go entirely differently, then of course you can change frequency if you completely change other variables. But when I'm doing my regular training, I've always had issues when going every other day. So that's really what's important. It's not a matter of trying to flatten out your periodization. It's a matter of, if your peak is really high volume-wise or frequency-wise, to then just take that lower but still have the same pattern as it's fluctuating across the training cycle. So just flattening it out would not be the solution in my opinion. Should you adjust training prescription numbers when you train with a stiff bar when your 1 rep max was done with a whippy bar? Okay, the short answer to this is yes. Now the longer answer is it definitely depends on grip width, loading, and the width of the plates. So if you deadlift under 495, realistically it's not that big of a deal. So every now and then I'll see a female powerlifter, and this isn't any one in particular, I've just seen this in general, where they'll be like, oh my god, it doesn't really affect things, when their max is around 400 or 365, something like that. It's like, yeah, it doesn't, because it's not enough weight to affect anything. Whereas when you get to 650 pounds, that's where, with pound plates at least, that's when it really starts to make a huge difference. So also why it makes a bigger difference with pound plates is because it's dispersing the weight out farther. So that's where, in my opinion, there's a lot of misconception, where a lot of guys who compete very often, like Chad Wesley Smith, for example, he grips fairly wide and he deadlifts heavy in competition with kilogram plates, and then he'll say, it only helps like 20 pounds, if not less. Whereas someone who pulls sumo, who grips a lot of the smooth, you can get 50 plus pounds if you're just training in the gym, maybe even have one bumper plate. So that's just something to keep in mind, that the degree of how much the bar is flexing depends a lot on these variables. And it's not really just you use a deadlift bar and then you get X amount of weight. It's a matter of looking at how much it flexes. It's not something that's that mysterious either. Just videotape it and look at the difference in flexion of the bar, and then just look at how much range of motion that's taking off. That's the most logical way to do it. Are you working on any more programs? The old ones are awesome. Well, thank you for that. And yes, I am. I'm working on the deadlift program right now. But the mistake I made with the squat program is I released it while I was doing it. And I think that definitely caused me some issues. So what I'm doing now is I did that first phase was from the program, the last video I uploaded. The next video I'm going to upload is the second phase. And then from there, we'll see how it continues to go. And so far, it's been going extremely well through all the phases. And I've done this program pretty similarly. I've done it before, so I have a very high degree of confidence that it will be good. And then after I'm done with all of it and fully peaked and then max out, then I'll definitely work on trying to release it as soon as possible. Are you offering coaching? Yes, and mostly I want to do it in the Iron Den gym. So if you can at all get there in person in the Houston, Texas area, that is by far the ideal situation for me. As far as online, I want a small group, but it's so small that's why a lot of times I don't mention it. Like I only want maybe 3 more lifters, maybe 4 more lifters. That I want to keep very tight and controlled, because in person is ultimately my main passion as far as growing it as aggressively as possible. So either way, if you're interested in that, just email me. Any advantages with hook grip versus mixed grip? Outside of the ones that everybody's already talked about when it comes to bicep tears or all those debates, that's not really what I'm as interested in. Whereas really what I'm interested in lately is the symmetry of a sumo deadlift definitely has improved pretty significantly with the hook grip. And also the degree in which you're able to keep the bar close at lockout has improved. So that, I think, is a big reason why we're seeing a lot of huge sumo deadlifters using hook grip, like Kaler and Yuri Belkin. I even saw Mr. Deadlift, the IPF best deadlifter. He was even doing hook grip a little bit in training. So I think that does have an objective advantage there. Now, the main issue that I have with hook grip, and that I know a lot of people do, is it can get a little bit more difficult to get your lats and upper back tight. So off the floor can be a little bit less explosive. I think the simplest way to put it is that if you can do it successfully and you can be as strong off the floor, hook grip is an undeniable advantage, in my opinion, for the sumo deadlift. For conventional, I think it really just doesn't matter as much either way. Conditioning while having a laborious job. He works 4 to 5 days a week, does strength training at the same time. Should I still do GPP? For you, I would say almost certainly to not do that much conditioning. In the end of the day, your body is not like it distinguishes everything as if it's a workplace environment and then it doesn't affect your gym performance or anything like that. So if you're hauling stuff, if you're moving a lot of things, then you're going to get to the gym and it's going to take away from your recovery to some extent. That's inevitable. Now, the thing is, you might be able to still do a little bit of really steady state cardio if it's just not similar to that. So for example, if biking for 20 minutes or 15 minutes twice a week, if that just targets a way different energy system where you're just using very slow pace and you're just getting your heart rate up a little bit, whereas at work you're doing more of like intermediate work, whereas you're lifting stuff, but you're also moving around, so it's not quite lifting, nor is it quite cardio. That's the only way that I would do it. But I would definitely not do anything like sled pushes. I would avoid sprints. I would avoid all of that because that's only going to eat at your recovery, like you said. Stress adds up in totality. It's not completely separated from each other. Have your thoughts on the conjugate method changed recently? You've been doing a lot of partial range of motion training lately, mainly due to injury. Would you consider using reverse bands and bands in your training? No, my views on conjugate have not changed at all. And it's actually kind of ironic because the reason why, outside of injury, why I use the block pull as an accessory was to replace something like snatch grip or to replace conventional. It would be an accessory like that to actually get more specific. So it was actually more work that's similar to the Sumo because it's I've been away from pulling Sumo fairly heavy for so long that I wanted the variation to even be a little bit more specific. So it's actually completely the opposite of what conjugate really operates on, which is variation being the emphasis. And the biggest thing is that I never pull partial without doing a full range of motion pull right before that. And also something that is very easy, this isn't your fault at all for having this misconception, is it's really easy to see a video and then think, oh, you've been doing a lot of partials lately. I literally did 2 weeks of partials. So I didn't do any part. So the past 10 months, I just did 2 weeks of partials. So it's really important to consider that's not exactly everything that's going on. It's just that was a notable accessory for that past 3 week cycle. And I just front loaded that and then peaked a little bit and then, did my 585 for 4 reps. And also keep in mind that I was doing the extended range of motion through the deficit deadlift, beltless deadlifts, longer than the block pulls that whole time. And I finished it later and I started it before I even implemented the block pulls. So it's very easy to run with ideas, but that's just not what was going on. And in terms of bands and chains or accommodating resistance, for the Sumo, it's very unlikely that I would do that, but I do see your point that partial range of motion I definitely think can be useful as long as you emulate that position effectively and you're doing it for a reason that makes sense. I was actually doing it before I got injured too to help with my lockout, and I did that along with a midway pause deadlift, so that really helped me build the strength through that sticking point, which for me was at lockout. But I also have changed up technique as well. So I basically had a triple-pronged approach and then totally just blasted that and fixed that issue, and now it's no longer a problem. So in situations like that, it definitely can be useful. Were you weaker when switching at first to a wider grip on the Sumo deadlift? Absolutely. And this is something that's actually kind of strange to do, to go from gripping too narrow to then gripping at the start of the knurling, because now I see other lifters where they're really talented and they have huge Sumo pulls, but a lot of times they're using straps and they're gripping really narrow, where I just know they're going to have a bad time at the meet. And you can know that they're going to deadlift 50 pounds less than their triple. And a lot of times it happens, especially when they're using a deadlift bar and gripping that narrow. So gripping wider definitely makes you weaker off the floor initially, assuming you're gripping slightly wider than vertical arms. But a lot of times that's what's necessary to fix your lockout. And a lot of times if you don't change that, if you stand really wide and you also have a really narrow grip and you have balance issues at lockout, you can really do any type of accessory, and a lot of times it will not change. You can have a completely flat back position. A lot of times guys do have amazing starting positions using that deadlift style, yet they have lockout issues. So it's important to understand it's not due to rounding. It's not due to all these other issues. A lot of times it's not due to grip strength, even though they think it is, where really the bar's just rolling out of their hands because they're in such a bad position because they're all cramped up and have a lot of friction at the top. If you made the rules, what would your punishment be if someone was caught for taking steroids in the IPF? Definitely a lifetime ban. It'd be one time. If you're taking actual steroids, it's not just a stimulant, you're out. Now, I actually agree with Brett Gibbs for not shaking the hand of the Kazakhstan lifter. I didn't know that he was caught taking steroids before. And to me, that you just shouldn't be lifting. I think that deserves no respect. Okay, so last question here, and I wanted this Q&A to be as informative as possible, as practical information. Now, the next Q&A I'll do will still be on these same questions because I have a lot of good ones I want to get to. So I want to make that clear that if you asked a question, there's still a chance that I'll still get to that, especially if it's a little bit more of a left field one. I'll try to save that for the next one. Now, I want to end it on this one that is a little bit more subjective. It says, what do you think would have to be done for powerlifting to be an Olympic sport? Possibly creating one federation, but if so, how would drug testing be implemented? Okay, so for this, I think that this is almost irrelevant as far as federations go, because IPF is already in a pretty good position. It's already the only clear global organization that oversees powerlifting, especially drug-tested powerlifting, because it has by far the most affiliates, and it's truly the only world championship. That's not me being biased or anything. You can just count up the number of affiliate nations and compare that to something like IPL Worlds, and it's a joke how much better IPF is. Now, as far as getting into the Olympics, this is where I think that this is just a silly goal, though. Try to get outside of the bubble of powerlifting and just look up sports that are on the cusp of getting into the Olympics. Just do that. Look up, a lot of times there'll be articles by like NBC.com or sites similar to that. We'll say top 25 sports trying to get a bid into the Olympics. For example, I think chess is actually ahead of powerlifting because chess is officially IOC recognized, where I think the IPF is bidding to be IOC recognized, but I'm not sure that it quite is. So just look that up and read all of those sports, and you kind of come to the realization that nobody's talking about this outside of our little bubble. This is just our conversation, and then you realize, oh, this real world doesn't care about it. So it's not really something that's on the cusp if we're the only ones discussing it. Secondly, we have to consider the fact that Olympic weightlifting is already damaging the reputation of the entire Olympic Games. It has had so many positive drug tests, especially after retesting older samples. This makes no sense then for the IOC to then take in another even more strength-based sport. In fact, it only makes sense to take this kind of hit if it's a high revenue generating event like the 100-meter dash. And even if you think that drug testing is ridiculous and that cheating is inevitable anyways, you have to acknowledge this point on a public relations perspective. And the last main issue is a lot of people romanticize the Olympics way too much because they think everybody's going to be like Usain Bolt or like Michael Phelps on the cover of Wheaties like Ryan Lochte, but in reality that's just not how it works. On Business Insider I found an article that 50% of top 10 in track and field, they make $15,000 or under a year. So just think about it. That is not that big of a deal. You do get $25,000 in the US at least for winning gold, I've heard. But that's still not that big of a deal over a 4-year period for a time commitment that is outrageous training-wise. So in my opinion, it's just glamorized beyond what it's even worth. And on social media, you can make more money than that. You know, someone like Jason Blaha makes more money than those Olympians. Think about it. They're making $15,000. Jason Blaha is making probably way more than that. So obviously that's not a shot at Jason, but that's just the point is he didn't have to be this gifted Olympian. He just got in front of a camera and gave his opinion on topics on a sport that most people consider to be this, tiny little sport, powerlifting and strength training related topics, and he's doing better off than they are. So that's just something to consider, is that if anything, this is the era where it's important to take control, and this is the era where we have more independence. NBC is the one that makes money, and I'm sure the IOC probably. It's not that great being an Olympian if you're just scrapping by just for a 4-year shot, get your shot, then you're out, and then you have to figure out what to do with your life. Also, it's not even to mention the fact that TV time might not even be given to powerlifting. It's not like every sport is shown on prime time, if shown at all. So in my opinion, what we should focus on more is just making the sport successful in general. We don't have to have this pipe dream that's set up to fail in order to be motivated to still get better. The IPF World Stream, for example, the commentary I heard was pretty bad. So just improving that would be a bigger step for powerlifting than trying to find this way for IOC to somehow recognize us as a secondary, possibly maybe sport that might in 30 years get recognized as a one-level sport or something like that. This bureaucratical progress I don't put a lot of faith in. Whereas if you get better commentary for IPF Worlds and you get more views on that, then you get ads running on that, then you make it a bigger and bigger deal, then Ray Williams gets more and more sponsorships. Now you're turning it into actual money right now for lifters who deserve it right now. That to me is a way bigger deal, and it's something that has a lot more potential because we have talent to do that. We can make things, we can put work into it. So it's not to downplay all the national pride and everything, it's just to say for something that's so unlikely, to me it's not worth the amount of obsession that we see out of the powerlifting community over it. Oh, hey there. By the way, did you know that the USPA Open gives away $40,000, which is $15,000 more than you win if you win US Gold? Really makes you thank donor. So that's it, guys. Make sure to like the video, support the channel, subscribe if you haven't already, and thanks for watching, guys. Peace.
Man, fuck a shooting star. Biggie died, they shot a star. Who you know in West LA? Bring that ruckus to MA. Jeez.
Give up on your powerlifting Olympic dream. Just give it up.